Brexit finally took place, and today the focus of the Security Court is Great Britain, what has become one of the major powers in the world after leaving the European Union, and which security problems, despite strong special services, does the state have to face? Today we are going to discuss this with British writer and journalist Luke Harding, correspondent of The Guardian. I'm Tetiana Popova. Good evening.
Since January the 1st, Great Britain has finally withdrawn from the European Union. Since the new year, new rules for travel, trade, immigration and security cooperation have come into force. This was preceded by an 11-month transition period set aside for negotiations on further trade. Agreement on this issue was reached only by the end of the designated period. Until the trade agreement is approved by all EU countries, it is valid on a temporary basis until the end of February. Recall that in 2016, the UK held a referendum to leave the EU with almost 52% of those who voted in favor.
Hi, Luke. So, how did the separation from European Union affect the British? Did it add fuel to separatist tendencies in Scotland and Northern Ireland? How is London supposed to deal with this problem?
You're right. It's a big problem that has become worse after Brexit. What you have to remember in Scotland is that 2/3 of Scottish people, when there was a referendum back in 2016, voted to stay inside the European Union. So the majority of people in Scotland want to be in the EU. And obviously we're not. I mean, Brexit has happened. The UK has left. We now have a situation in Northern Ireland where some of the supermarket shelves are empty because it's much harder now to get food from England to Northern Ireland and so on. So Brexit is something of a mess at the moment. And of course, the party in control in Scotland, the Scottish Nationalist Party, they want a second referendum that they lost narrowly in 2014. And there are elections in May, which they will win overwhelmingly. And then you have a kind of struggle between Edinburgh, seat of the Scottish Parliament, and London. And my own view is that I think at some point, I suspect that Scottish independence will happen. I think another referendum will happen. And it's the consequences of Brexit. It's not just about European Union membership. It's also about the future of the UK.
Look, in your book, Shadow State, you point out Russians as those who had influenced Brexit voting process. Do you consider Brexit a defeat of British Secret Service? And how does the Secret Service estimate their role in the whole process?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we know is that the Kremlin ran a big social media operation in support of Brexit in 2016, in the same way that the trolls in St. Petersburg were pushing Donald Trump in America. Quite often the same people were involved. And also there was a pretty big espionage operation run out of the Russian embassy in London to get close to the people campaigning for Brexit, British campaigners offering them gold and diamonds and so on. And what I find quite astonishing is that the British government, Conservative Party, which supports Brexit, has literally been looking the other way, does not want to investigate the question of Russian interference, despite what's been happening in America, in Ukraine, across Central and Eastern Europe, and in the Soviet near abroad. And I think this is a mistake. I think this is very foolish because Russia supported Brexit because it hates the European Union. It wants to weaken the UK militarily, politically, economically, make it a smaller presence on the world stage. And when we have a second Scottish independence referendum, you can guarantee the same Kremlin trolls will be pushing Scottish independence. So what we need is to be honest about what's going on.
Why do you think completion of transitional period and signing of EU-UK trade and cooperation agreement take almost a year of negotiations, as this had been settled out only by Christmas?
Yes, I mean, it's been a pantomime. We really, in this country, we really didn't know until Christmas Eve that there was going to be a deal. It seemed quite possible that the UK would crash out of European Union space, customs arrangements without any deal whatsoever. Now we have a deal. It's a very thin deal, but it's like going back in time. We now have lorries queuing at the border in Dover to go to France. We have enormous amounts of paperwork. We have problems with trade with Northern Ireland and so on. I mean, the whole thing is, from my perspective, is a mess and also very sad. We got used to the right to travel freely in the European Union, to have visa-free access, to live, to work, even to fall in love, Tatiana. And all of this has now gone. To my mind, the UK is really a much smaller and a sadder place after Brexit.
Look, in your investigations, you paid special attention to Salisbury poisoning. It's actually starting of your Shadow State book. What is London's next move going to be in view of the latest evidence regarding Navalny poisoning and regarding others Russian Secret Service operations in Europe and in UK?
Yes. Well, I mean, British-Russian relations are terrible. They've been really bad for a very long time. They were awful when I was in Moscow as a correspondent a decade ago, following the murder of Alexander Litvinenko in London with a radioactive cup of tea, which was actually similar kind of assassination to what we saw in Salisbury in 2018, and indeed in Siberia with Alexei Navalny in August of this year. Now, the UK government, together with the European Union, has sanctioned various senior government officials. It sanctioned Alexander Bortnikov, the head of the FSB. But actually, so far, the action has been rather narrow. It's been rather narrowly focused on obvious top-level individuals. I mean, there is so much more that we in this country could do because, as you perfectly know, London, over the past couple of decades, has become Londongrad. It is full of oligarchs who have bought up the most expensive houses in our capital, who send their kids to British private schools, buy up businesses, and so on. And not all of them are bad people, but we've had a flow of dark money from Moscow into the UK, which has corrupted our politics and to some extent our democracy, I would argue. And, you know, it's easy to sanction Mr. Bortnikov, but there seems more reluctance to deal with the big problem, the macro problem, which is bad cash coming in and affecting our political life and undermining our democratic processes.
Look, you mentioned that cases of Litvinenko, Skripal's, arms dealer Gebriev in Bulgaria, as well as murder of Chechen rebel Khangashvili in Berlin, make utterly shocking examples of violence. In your opinion, how should NATO countries respond to such demonstrative execution of those who Kremlin finds inconvenient on their territories?
Yeah, well, you're completely right. We see a revisionist and hyper-aggressive Russia, which really believes itself to be at war, a kind of unofficial war with NATO, with America, with the UK, with the European Union, and in recent years has had groups of undercover assassins, secret diversionary cells operating out of France, going to places like Bulgaria, as you mentioned, the UK, Berlin, to kill state enemies. And it's a huge problem for NATO. It's a huge problem for the West generally. And I think the point we've reached after 2 decades of Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin is really Western policymakers have to understand what Kiev already knows, that Mr. Putin is not interested in mutually beneficial solutions. He's not interested in dialogue. He has a kind of absolute KGB mindset, which is adversarial and zero-sum. So I think the place we are now in terms of international relations is all about containment, a kind of Cold War doctrine where actually you recognize you can't change Russia or Moscow. You merely have to contain it. And so I think we have to investigate these murders. We have to sanction the individuals who are involved.
Last December, The Guardian, the newspaper you are working for, has been picketed by those dissatisfied with your publications. Who were these people and how reasonable were their demands? Is it common to picket major media outlets in Britain?
I have to admit, I don't know anything about this. I mean, the Guardian building has been empty since the start of the pandemic in March, almost a year ago, and we're all working from home. So it's possible people were picketing, and you know, it's a free country. If people don't like what we publish, of course they can protest. I mean, I think comment is free and facts are sacred. That's the kind of Guardian's motto.
Look, actually, these picketers accused you of your article, which you published in 2018. They say that Assange didn't meet Manafort in Ecuador embassy. What can you say about this?
We included Mr. Assange's denial at the time that we published the article. He has a lot of passionate supporters in this country. And what you have to remember and bear in mind is that The Guardian has absolutely opposed his extradition to the United States. I mean, now actually it's clear that he's not going to be extradited. And yeah, we collaborated with Mr. Assange. What WikiLeaks did, together with many media outlets in 2010, was journalism. And if you prosecute him, you have to prosecute all of us. So, I mean, I think actually The Guardian's support for Julian Assange and his court battle has been very clear.
How exactly may UK top court decision to block extradition of Assange to US affect relations between two countries?
Well, we have to wait and see. I mean, the legal process isn't over yet, but I suspect the Biden administration will have other priorities going forward. I mean, Joe Biden has a huge in tray, the pandemic to start with, then a whole host of international issues from Iran, from climate change to Russia, to what you do about Mr. Putin, who keeps on hacking American, or his spies keep on hacking American federal government agencies. So I think Mr. Assange is down the list. And also the great irony of this is that Hillary Clinton, actually in the Obama administration, they didn't do anything against Mr. Assange when they were in power. So I suspect that the case may quietly go away rather than be pursued by the new Biden administration.
Luke, thank you for interview. Let me remind that it was Luke Harding, a writer and a journalist from the newspaper The Guardian from London. It was a Security Code and its host Tetiana Popova.